So when you hear the acronym HACCP, what springs to mind? Probably forms, files, maybe a bit of a headache. But what if I told you its origin story is, well, it's out of this world? We're not talking about a dusty old rulebook. We're talking about a mission plan, cooked up for an environment where getting it wrong simply wasn't an option.
Right then, here's our flight plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at the high-stakes problem that kicked this all off at NASA. Then, we'll get into the blueprint they designed to solve it. We'll break down the 7 core principles that every food business has to follow, see how that works in the real world, and then, and this is the important bit, we'll focus on your role as the inspector doing the final flight check.
Okay, let's blast off. We're winding the clock back to the 1960s, right in the thick of the space race. Now, getting a person into space threw up thousands of challenges, but one of the most critical ones was surprisingly down to earth. What's for lunch? I mean, really think about that for a second. There's no hospital in orbit. A dodgy meal isn't just a bit of an upset stomach, it could be absolutely catastrophic. It could jeopardize the astronaut's life and the entire multi-million-dollar mission. The pressure on NASA to get this right was just immense. Now, back then, the standard way of checking food safety was pretty basic. You'd test the finished product. But for NASA, that was a complete non-starter. To be absolutely certain the food was safe, they'd have to test so much of it there'd be barely anything left for the astronaut to eat. It was a reactive system, and in a zero-failure environment like space travel, it was just far, far too risky. So NASA went to the Pillsbury Corporation and gave them a mission: build us a new system from the ground up. And what they came back with was revolutionary, a truly preventative approach. And you know, this brilliant idea didn't just stay in orbit. It was quickly adopted worldwide, championed by organizations like the Codex Alimentarius, and today, it's the very foundation of the food safety laws that you enforce every single day.
So, what exactly was this game-changing blueprint, this whole new way of thinking about food safety that came out of the challenge of putting a man in space? Let's take a closer look.
And there it is, the official definition. The 2 words that really matter here are systematic and control. Instead of just hoping for the best and checking at the end, HACCP is all about methodically looking at the entire process from start to finish, figuring out where things could go wrong, and putting controls in place before they do. It's proactive, not reactive. Simple as that.
And you know, the name itself tells you everything you need to know. You do a hazard analysis to identify the critical control points, and those are the absolute make-or-break moments in any food process, those specific points where applying a control is essential to keep the food safe. And this is where it lands squarely in your world. This isn't just a good idea or an industry best practice. Under UK law, Regulation 852/2004 to be specific, every single food business operator is legally required to put in place, implement, and maintain a permanent system based on these hazard principles. It's not optional, it is the law. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand how HACCP fits with general day-to-day hygiene. Think of your good hygiene practices. You know, things like cleaning schedules, pest control, staff training. Think of that as the launch pad. It's the essential, solid foundation. The HACCP plan is the rocket itself. It's a highly specific, targeted mission to control the most significant hazards for that particular business. You simply can't have a successful launch without a solid launch pad.
Okay, let's get into the engine room of the system. Every single HACCP plan, whether it's for a tiny cafe or a massive food factory, is built on the exact same 7 fundamental principles.
And here they are. This is the mandatory flight manual for food safety, and it follows a perfectly logical sequence, doesn't it? First, you analyze the hazards to figure out your CCPs. Then, for those points, you set strict limits. You create a system to monitor those limits, and you've got to have a plan for what to do, your corrective actions, if a limit is ever missed. And finally, you verify that the whole system actually works, and you keep meticulous records. It's a perfect closed loop designed for continuous control.
Right, so that's the theory. But what does this actually look like on a wet Tuesday in a real-life food business? Let's run through a quick example to bring it all to life.
So here's a snippet from a HACCP plan for a business that does pickling. They've done Principle 1, the hazard analysis, and they've identified a very significant biological hazard. If they don't get the acidification right, there's a risk of Clostridium botulinum growth. And as you know, that is a very, very serious hazard.
This brings us straight to Principle 3, establishing a critical limit.
To control that botulism risk, the business has scientifically determined that the final pH of the product absolutely must be at or below 4.6. This isn't a guideline. It's a non-negotiable safety limit. If it goes any higher, control is lost and that food could be dangerously unsafe.
And of course, that leads directly to principles 4 and 7. To make sure that critical limit is always met, their plan says the chef has to monitor the pH of every single batch with a calibrated meter. And crucially, they have to write it down. They have to document those checks and keep those records for at least 2 years. This creates that vital evidence trail that you'll be looking for during your inspection.
Right. This brings us to the final and I think the most important part of our mission today. This is where you come in. Because if the food business is the flight crew, you are mission control.
Your job is not to write their HACCP plan for them. Your critical role is to audit it, to challenge it, and to verify it. You're there to make sure it's not just a fancy document gathering dust in an office, but that it's a living, breathing, effective system that's understood and followed by every single person on that site.
So what does that flight check actually involve? Well, of course, you're reviewing the records, the monitoring sheets, the corrective action logs, but you're also out on the factory floor observing. Are people actually doing what the plan says they do? You're checking their equipment. Are those probes and pH meters accurate? You might even take a few samples yourself. You're constantly testing their system from every single angle to make sure it's fit for purpose.
And it all boils down to this one quote from the Codex. As an officer, as an auditor, what you are really there to assess is commitment. Is food safety truly baked into the culture of that business, from the managing director right down to the newest starter? Or is it all just a paper shuffling exercise? Because that commitment, that's the fuel that makes the entire system fly.
And that really leaves us with the one fundamental question that should be driving your every action during an inspection. When you walk into a food business, you're not just there to tick boxes. You are an auditor on a critical mission. And your single most important job is to find the answer to this question. Is the plan on the paper? The reality on the premises?